So welcome everyone, thank you for coming. Today we're discussing, have the panel entitled Packaging Without Borders, Navigating Global Trends and Compliance. My name's Tim Sykes, I'm from Packaging Europe, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel. We're going to be discussing some global trends around packaging regulation and how they're shaping the packaging industry, and beginning with a snapshot of what's going on around the world. And then we're going to discuss some of the challenges that come from these involved in compliance and how businesses can equip themselves to respond to them. Very glad to have with us four expert speakers who know much more than I do about this. Here to my right, we have Scott Trenor from the Association of Plastics Recyclers, so representing recyclers in North America. Have Joachim Quoden, Managing Director of EXPRA, the European EPR platform. Fiona Durie from CEFLEX, which is a consortium trying to build a circular economy for flexible packaging across Europe. And Guido Aufdemkamp, who leads Flexible Packaging Europe. So let's start by talking about trends around the world. And I'd like to start with you, Fiona, representing this continent of Europe. What are the key demands on flexible packaging at the moment? And I guess everyone in the audience has heard about PPWR. What's that mean for flexibles?
Yeah, I guess you've heard of PPWR by now. I'm going to speak from a CEFLEX perspective, so talking about the recyclability and recycled content aspects, and particularly on plastic flexible packaging. I think there are two key demands. The first one is to achieve a 55% recycling rate for polyethylene and polypropylene-based flexible packaging, and the recycled content targets in the PPWR. And I think that's fairly challenging, but the additional challenge and the additional demand is to do it within the timeline that has been prescribed in the regulation. But I think I'd like to kind of emphasize that this is no longer a theoretical demand or a theoretical challenge. At CEFLEX, we have done quite a lot of work, and we actually know that it's possible to do this, and we know how to do it. So that's kind of the good news. I think the second demand is not so much a PPWR demand as such, but it's an industry demand. And that is the demand for clarity and certainty. We're hearing quite a lot of noise in Brussels at the moment from different parts of the industry, and everybody is basically asking in different ways for legal certainty. And I think from a CEFLEX perspective, again, the good news is that some of that clarity is actually starting to emerge. We do see progress, at least on the topics that we're working on. So, you know, I think from our perspective, the best approach is to keep focusing on the regulation and trying to implement the legislation that's not there, that is there, and not trying to reopen it.
Thank you. And let's turn to Scott, representing another region, North America, and a very different regulatory landscape, I guess we can say. What are the key developments that we see in your region, and what do they mean for flexibles?
Yeah, so let me start north and work south. So, sorry, a little feedback. So Canada, almost all of the provinces have EPRs, and some of them have had it for a number of years. I think what's new for film and flexible is the province of Quebec is starting to collect flexible packaging, both polyethylene and polypropylene curbside. So they did that in January for the first time, and that's probably the largest government or collection program in North America for polypropylene films. I think they're still trying to find markets for those, and we'll probably talk about design and how we better design films to be more circular. North America is very spotty, right? So the West Coast and the Northeast, right, are working towards the EPR. California just released their fee schedules. There's still no really true plan to collect flexibles outside of a drop-off way, so not at your house or your apartment. So that's going to complicate collection and reduce the material that's going through. And then finally, Mexico just passed their circular economy law about 3 weeks ago. Very high level, all the regulations, much like with PPWR and the EU, right? They set the high level regulations, and then the details are coming out in the next couple of weeks. So it's quickly emerging. Ideally, especially in the States, we learn from what's been going on at Europe, but we're Americans, so maybe we don't do that so well.
And we don't have any representatives here from other parts of the world, but we were talking just before the panel, there's also in the Asia-Pacific region, we can see developments maybe slightly behind what's happening in Europe. India has regulation. China, Japan are also developing EPR. I apologize for the feedback you're getting from me. So globally, we clearly do have a trend for more and more regulation, more and more EPR coming in. And I'm interested in your perspective, Joachim, about what that means as a kind of overall picture for packaging with regulation and EPR.
That's a challenge for us in general as well, because EXPRA is not only a European alliance. We have members, for example, in Australia and New Zealand, 2 members in Canada from Quebec and Ontario, Chile, Colombia. So you see, it's a global phenomenon. I always say the virus of EPR, the positive virus of EPR, has spread all over the world. This might be a little bit painful for industry on one side. On the other side, it gives a great opportunity, because you can learn from all the mistakes that we have done in Europe and are still doing in Europe. And in the meantime, Quebec, Ontario, I would say to most of the European countries, they are at eye level in the meantime. They learned, and they very quickly speeded up their systems with all the challenges still. Australia, New Zealand, they sent many delegations. Industry sent many delegations. They became a partner even long before they started the system. So I would say a clever approach. Design the system, trying to avoid all the mistakes that we did. And we are still going on in Europe with all the mistakes. We have 27 different solutions. Unfortunately, the colleagues in the US do exactly the same nonsense. 7 states with EPR, 7 totally different systems. But we talk about harmonization all the time. And this is I would say, our biggest part where we can improve, going closer together. PPWR might help here. If we have the same criteria, harmonization would be a logical step. But who is brave enough to tell the member states what to do? This will be the big question. Huh?
Right, I'm going to use this microphone so you don't get horrible noises. And Guido, so we've talked about the situation across many geographies and particularly Europe. How are your members, the flexible packaging companies across Europe, responding? What are the challenges that they're having to rise to?
In general, the PPWR issue now, I think we were now very active in the past weeks, also very public, calling to keep the integrity of PPWR, because our membership has already invested more than €1 billion in the past years to kind of get more and more ready. The path is clear, right? It's what we have to do. Details are obviously challenges, but in general, they have invested. They feel prepared. Also, the customers are more and more prepared. So we really call for keep the regulation as it is, work out the difficulties now in secondary legislation. And I think what is very often overseen, and I think Joachim already touched it now, when there is a buzzword in Brussels right now, simplification. It's super popular to simplify all the legislation they issued. Yes, that's a fantastic thing. However, for us, or for the entire value chain, the PPWR is already a simplification, because it is one regulation for the continent and not 27 different things. I think SUPD has shown when member states can have creativity doing legislations, they fully use this creativity with a lot of nonsense. Yeah, so regulation, PPWR is a simplification, and let's please work on it. give industry predictability. And yeah, I think when we start now from a European perspective, doing it well in Europe, this can also be has an industrial impact, because then we are again leaders in the world in something.
So an interesting context to what you've just discussed, Guido, is that last week a letter was signed by CEOs of a lot of brands and some packaging companies asking the European Commission to reopen certain questions and to pause guidelines. But it's been
They actually say they are not asking for a reopening, yeah? So, but
okay.
That is the perception, right? Everybody has.
Yeah. But it's been my impression that in general the flexibles industry has been not part of that.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. Okay, great. Fiona, so let's continue to think about the implications of all of this. And as I said, CEFLEX is actively trying to bring the industry together to build towards a circular economy. What's the progress report at this stage?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm the advocacy consultant, as it says on the board here. I'm not the technical expert, but I'll give you my understanding of the progress. And I mean, I'll give you also a perception or a view from a legislative point of view, which is obviously an absolutely key enabler of the circular economy for flexible packaging. My colleagues are estimating that as of today, as of 2025 rather, we have an estimated 1.5 million tons of flexible packaging derived PCR in use, and that's polyethylene, polypropylene, and it's including household and commercial and industrial. So that's kind of the state of where we are. And maybe before I get to the progress part, I'll also highlight the challenge. The challenge is that we estimate that by 2035, that 1.5 million tons figure needs to go up to 5.9 million tons. It's quite a big leap. The progress that we've made, I think, is maybe even compared to 5 years ago. We understand much better what has to be done. We have a pathway. We have CEFLEX design guidelines, and design is absolutely critical. So the design for circular economy guidelines, if you follow those, that's already going to make a huge difference. And we also have a report in the pipeline on our recycling and sorting strategy, which is basically going to give you a sort of a pathway or a roadmap for how to get to this 5.9 million tons within the timeline available. I want to also acknowledge that I know things are not very easy at the moment economically and geopolitically, so we recognize that, but we want to give, a plan and a vision for the future, and we know where to go. Maybe in terms of challenges, I think there are two. The first one is how to do this and still make money. How can we do it profitably? How can we, make sure there's a business case? And maybe echoing some of what Joachim has said, I think EPR in Europe is going to be absolutely critical, and we need to get the legislative framework strengthened so that we can level out the performance across the EU now. And I'm willing, if I get the green light from CEFLEX, to take on the challenge and see. I'm not too scared to talk to the member states. Let's see what we can do. But I know it's not going to be very easy. We also need investment decisions to be taken now. So that's all part of, getting the EPR system working and making that business case. And then the second challenge, I think maybe I'm going to be a bit provocative, is we need to make sure that everybody plays their role. Everybody does their bit. Sometimes I hear people saying, this packaging and packaging waste regulation, it's very ambitious, it's not really realistic, and it probably won't happen. PPWR is not going away. The ambition is set, and I think we just have to try and do our best to implement it. We might not meet the timelines. I hope we do, but I think we need to go there, and everyone hopefully can play their part in that.
Thanks. Let's have the same question for Scott, but applied to North America. How is progress, and what are the key challenges and barriers that industry needs to navigate?
Yeah, so I think the reality in the US, Canada, Mexico is that we're not circular in films, with small exceptions. So much like Fiona mentioned, if we think about shrink wrap, back of store type of applications, we're pretty good at collecting that. We're pretty good at making it back to film, and I have to do pounds to kilograms in my head, but about 500,000 metric tons of back of store film was recycled in North America last year. So it's a reasonable start. But when we think about that film, it's the easiest film to recycle. There's very little ink. There's no labels. Maybe there's too many paper labels that get stuck on that, right? So it's really the low-hanging fruit, and it never makes it into our houses, right? So it's not contaminated with dog and cat food or chip dust and that sort of thing. So as we think about collecting more film and recycling, it needs to be designed to be compatible with the recycling stream, right? So we mostly think about polyethylene. We also need to do that with polypropylene. So, maybe they can make it back into TI's Relife line of mechanically recycled labels and packaging. But that's all based on design, right? If we continue to use inks and ink binders and barrier layers and metallized films that can't go back into a extruder and remake film, circularity is never going to happen. It's just going to continue to go into either the landfill or maybe into wood lumber types of products that we use quite a bit in North America.
Okay, so Joachim, we've already talked a few times about the role that EPR plays in this. And if we take a step back, PPWR ought to mean boom time for plastics recycling, shouldn't it? Because it has to get recycled. But we're in a world where recyclers in Europe are in recession. EPR is the system that theoretically generates the flow of materials, pays for the recycling systems. And it's not at the moment doing that to the degree that we need it to. What do you see as the key enablers that will build that system that we need?
Well-designed EPR is, in my point of view, the answer. And we have to go one step back. It is called extended producer responsibility. They didn't call it EPO. They didn't call it extended producer obligation. And I think we all agree EPR is something different from a taxation system. So the government collects money from a product, from a service, from whatever, and then it goes into the big pot, and then part of it is used for a defined purpose. Whereas EPR is, for me, something different, involvement of industry, and the money is collected from industry, and the money should be used with the blessing of industry for a certain purpose. So that's the difference. If you see now the implementation in all the various countries, you can relatively easily identify some front runners, even from the statistics. So even if we have questions to Eurostat, but let's take the front runners. And you will see that the EPR systems leading, or the countries leading, have EPR systems where there's an influence to the design of the collection, sorting, and recycling systems. Whereas other systems are more like a taxation system, so industry is allowed to put some money into the field. But what is happening to the money, even who is using the money, in some countries is even not known. So our job at the moment is to convince the politicians that it might make sense to change those systems which are lagging behind, using the front-running systems. But of course, people who are making money at the moment are not very much in agreement with this. Not openly, but in the back. So this will be my job for the next 1 or 2 years. We have a chance with the famous Circular Economy Act, because the Commission said we will improve the minimum requirements for EPR. So the first most important thing is, however the solution is, I don't want, as Mr. Orell is always saying, no religious discussions, but if you implement PPWR, you have to follow these 10 or 15 rules. And if your system is not able to follow them, because, or this is a business secret, and I cannot say that my tax is used in a certain way, but sorry, then you have to change your system. So either we agree on joint rules, everybody has to play. I think it's in football the same. If one of the clubs says, I will not listen to the referee, then he has to play in a different league. Very easy. So I just have to convince now the Commission, but we will work on it.
You're a very persuasive man, Joachim. So.
I'm happy to hear that you only need 1 or 2 years to convince everybody. So that's another thing. I would like to add something for what you said from a flexible packaging perspective. Brand owners with their extended producer responsibility are already paying fees since decades into the various systems. But for a long time, they did get no service for it. They paid into a system, and then the system at the same time even said, and there still are schemes, saying, yeah, but flexible packaging is so difficult to recycle, we are not going to deal with this. We just collect the money, but not deal with it really. And this is kind of going to change, fortunately, in 1 or 2 years' time, and then we are there. No, I just wanted to say that a well-designed EPR also then really services the companies contracting the EPR scheme to do the work they are contracted for.
Well, before we turn over to some audience questions, there's one further context where we see challenges arising, and that's a very volatile geopolitical situation. Everyone knows what's going on in the Middle East at the moment, but also a lot of political volatility, maybe in some places shifts in political will. We've seen in Europe how important the European Union, the Commission has been in driving the recycling agenda. So I'm interested whether you see that as a big challenge, a fundamental challenge for driving circularity around the world, and what kind of impacts it might be having at the moment. Might be unfair. I'm going to start with the one American on here to give some thoughts.
Sorry. I think it's unfortunate that the recycling industry needs a war, right, to justify its existence and to justify the important work that they do every day in collecting materials for us, reprocessing them in a way so that they can go back into packaging, right? Now with stricter, I guess, or fewer imports from the conflict, right? It's shifting back to recycled content, but the unfortunate reality is it probably won't stick, right? Ideally, this war ends sometime soon, as sooner the better, but what we don't want to see is everyone just going back to the virgin materials because for the same reasons they've been using them all the time, right? They're cheaper, they run the same every time, they look the same every time, and they're cheaper, right? And I know I said they're cheaper twice, but I think that's really important in this discussion.
Anyone else?
So maybe I can share what is happening with our membership. So fortunately, availability is not an issue. It's the financial impact, of course. I think nobody has seen this increase in history. Unfortunately, this is kind of another crisis following other crises before. So I think we are in a world of one crisis to the other. So there will be no normal year anytime soon. Nevertheless, think for flexible packaging, mainly going for food, used for food packaging, the recycling industry cannot yet provide the recyclates necessary, mainly constrained by food contact regulation. Yeah, so that's basically the big barrier. But nevertheless, if materials are collected for recycling and then the recycling happens, and I think as Fiona already said, there are enough markets who can take those recyclates and should take it and then go step by step developing, learning from the recyclers. Also, they will advance so that we might end up then even using more recyclates in food contact materials.
Thank you. Well, we're going to end with, I want to end with a positive message, some thoughts about what we can do. And I'm going to ask each of you in turn to give me a final statement with a sentence beginning, we can meet our obligations if. Let's start at that end.
if PPWR stays intact and secondary legislation has some common sense?
I think we can meet our obligations if all flexible packaging is designed for recycling. I think it's also really important that we take a systems approach, and we have to make sure that that the whole system works, and we're not just collecting something with it, and there's nowhere for it to go. And there needs to be a business case, and we need the political will. That's a lot of a lot of things to happen, but we need the political will. And I maybe just wanted to take the opportunity maybe to close off by saying, even if you speculate that the regulation's not going to be enforced and the packaging that's not compliant won't be taken off the market, I think some people are gambling on that. I would just say probably. I think that the costs will penalise inaction. So, I mean, on the EPR side, we'll see a spread of state-run PROs. So we'll have EPR fees being paid into a pot, and it won't be used for what it's needed for. Municipalities won't tolerate non-recyclable packaging in their mixed waste stream. And basically, EPR fees will go up. And I think the producers are already telling us that they're going up and that they can't pass on this level of increase to consumers. So I guess what happens then, it goes the other way up the stream. So I would say don't wait around. There's a lot of opportunity and lots to be gained.
I think industry, we will meet the obligations. For me, there is no if, because we have started to do our homework years ago, and I think this is some of the things that CEFLEX did fantastic, and all your members of CEFLEX, also Taghleef here, you did your work. You did not put your head in the sand and said, hopefully the storm will go over. So many companies are preparing for the future, and with the help of CEFLEX and so on, we know what to do. And I think this is the most important part. We are not desperate, not knowing what to do. We know what to do. We will have to convince a lot of stakeholders. Okay, but we know what to do. We know the direction, and we just have to be strong enough now to start the way and to push people aside that are in our way. So, but I'm a Star Trek fan as well, so I have to be optimistic all the time.
So I'm going to echo what Fiona said, right? We need to start with design, because if it's designed to recycle, if it's not designed to be recyclable, maybe we shouldn't actually waste our money collecting it, right? And CEFLEX, APR, and ResiClass all have great design guidance, and we work with both organizations to help that out. I think in the US and Canada, we need EPR to shift from just a supply-side collection-focused regulation to focus on demand and recycled content minimums. There are plenty of studies that have gone around, one out of UC Santa Barbara last year that showed that the way to reduce litter, reduce fossil fuel extraction, reduce carbon footprint of packaging is PCR mandates. That's the biggest driver for those reductions. And it helps overcome, or not overcome, right? But it forces you to increase your cost because you have no choice, right? You need to meet these mandates.
Thank you very much. Well, we promised to have time for some audience questions. I'm expecting to see a forest of hands. I might pick on one of you if you don't ask. Oh, we have a question at the back.
How about chemical recycling? Because we have talked about recycling, but there is a very big difference between mechanical recycling and chemical recycling. And I know very little about chemical recycling, but to me it's very far from getting industry volumes.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, there's a spectrum of recycling technologies between mechanical and what we can do, physical recycling, dissolution, there's depolymerization, there's pyrolysis, there's gasification, right? So, and I think all of them have their, let's say, their sweet spots in terms of feedstock requirements, cost, efficiencies. And I think as we think about and pyrolysis is the big one for films, right? As we think about chemical recycling, many of the things that mechanical recyclers don't want in their films, the pyrolysis producers don't want either, right? So some of these pigments, metals, laminating adhesives, these can have significant detrimental effects on the processability and the purity of the py oil or however they process that. So while I think pyrolysis and gasification, depolymerization are going to be increasingly important, especially in Europe with some of the food standards and the quantities of materials we need, they're going to be difficult to scale, partially because there's a thought that you don't need to design for them, and two is the cost.
Yeah, maybe I just add, I mean, we could do a whole session on chemical recycling. It's quite complicated, but I think, I mean, from a CEFLEX perspective, yes, just as Scott has said, there's a mix of recycling technologies that we need because we need different grades of PCR to service different markets. And in terms of the regulatory framework, there are being steps taken. I'm not saying everything is perfect, but we do have already legal acknowledgement that mass balance is an accepted calculation method. And we have kind of a recognition or an acknowledgement of chemical recycling's role in terms of the Single-Use Plastics Directive. So it's got to be part of the mix, I think.
Any other questions? Okay, so thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. And special thanks to Guido, Fiona, Joachim, and Scott for sharing their expertise. Have a great day, everyone.